Hello everybody and welcome to Limited Level Ups. I'm Alex, and this week on the show we're doing our Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate set overview. If you haven't joined us for one of these before, these are kind of like a condensed set review. I did the set review last week with Lord Tupperware. That was on the podcast feed, also on the Lords Unlimited YouTube channel if you want to go check that out. But if you do not have the time for a 6-hour set review, we got you covered here. We're doing all of the mechanics, the archetypes, some key cards, top commons, all that good stuff, all condensed into one episode. Also, the timing for this episode is kind of nice because yesterday was the early access event on Magic Arena for streamers. So I've already gotten 4 or 5 drafts under my belt before the set even comes out. So I'll be able to recount some of my experiences, share with you kind of the vibes for the archetypes and just the speed of the format, kind of how the games play out. So I am able to talk about this set with somewhat of an informed opinion, which is kind of nice. Just before we jump in, of course, got to shout out to the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedlevelups. That is the place that you can go if you want to support the show. If you like what we're doing here, feel like you've learned something, feel like you've gotten some value, check it out. You can go support the show. Helps us keep the lights on, helps me keep doing what I'm doing here. Really appreciate all the support for people who do support the podcast weekly. Of course, there's a bunch of reward tiers that we'd like to give back to you if you want to support. So there's benefits ranging from coaching to deck tech help to draft log reviews, all that kind of good stuff. There's also the Limited Level Ups Discord you can join. That's free for anybody to join. You can go to bits.ly/join the Discord if you want to join that. Discord spells a CH like Corticals. It's also in the link for both this YouTube video and for the podcast feed, so check it out there. Anybody who joins the Patreon at any level gets access to the secret channels in the Discord, which are direct access to me if you need help with the deck tech, with the draft log, that kind of stuff. I'm honestly on my computer most of the time, so anytime you want to ping me, I'm usually available. So you want to level up your game, that's another way you can do so. Anyways, let's jump into the show. Okay, so the first thing I think I should address with talking about this set is, what is this set? I know this has confused a lot of people, and I think Wizards has not done the best job of conveying exactly what this set is, or maybe hasn't done the best job of differentiating Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate from Commander Legends Baldur's Gate, because I know a lot of people just think, oh, this is the Commander format coming to Magic Arena. It's not that. It is its own draft format, just like a Streets of New Capenna or a Neon Dynasty. We're going to be drafting this set for the next 3 months on Magic Arena. It's got its own best of 3 queue. It's going to be the premier main format. So this is what we've got to work with for the next 3 months. There's no commanders. There's no drafting a background. If you did play Commander Legends, it's none of that. There are some cards from that set in this set, but for the most part, they're only similar in flavor and a few of those cards that are ported over. Of course, being a, quote-unquote alchemy set, there are a handful of digital cards. I will say, though, after playing the set, I know some people have hesitations about digital-only mechanics and how, they're a bit clunky and maybe a bit wordy, and, I fully hear you on that. I myself am somebody who doesn't mind the digital-only mechanics. I think they're kind of a cool innovation. But after playing for a while, I haven't found that they are, overbearing by any means. They kind of feel like sprinkled in there. I've even heard some content creators who drafted with me yesterday saying, I was kind of hesitant about the digital-only stuff, but it hasn't felt that much alchemy-ish. There's some heavy-handed stuff in there, specialized, which we'll get into in a little bit. Does maybe feel a little bit overwhelming at first, but I do think for the most part, this kind of just feels like like I said, like a Streets of New Capenna or like a Neon Dynasty, just your typical draft set. Now, let's get into the weeds quickly about what this set is composed of. So I mentioned briefly that this set has a bunch of cards from Commander Legends. I think it's got about 120 cards ported over, and they ported over cards that make sense in single player. They're not going to bring in any cards that care about multiple opponents or anything like that. It's just cards that you could put into a normal draft set, more normal standard set, and be like, yeah, it looks like a normal card. There's also about 80 cards that they have designed specifically for this set. You're not going to find those anywhere else. They're the alchemy cards, the digital only cards. And then to kind of fill in some gaps, I suppose, we've got about 50 or 60 cards that are reprinted from the previous Dungeons & Dragons set last year, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And I'm not exactly sure how they chose to, what cards to reprint, what cards not to. You would think maybe that they'd go, okay, let's take all the best and most exciting cards from that set, port them over. And there are some good cards, but there's also some not so good cards, and cards that I am questioning why they chose to reprint these ones and not other ones. But for the most part, it does sound like a little bit of a hodgepodge, a little bit of a Frankenstein's monsters of a set. I do feel like this set is cohesive for the most part, though. I know there are some concerns, I've heard some community concerns about, this is kind of feels like a thrown together set. And while that might be true, I don't feel like it at all impedes on the experience. Like, I feel like I was drafting just a normal set. The cards played well together. So I'm optimistic, and I'm trying to spread that optimism with the rest of the community, because I know there are some worried or naysaying voices out there. So it gets my stamp of approval, at least early on. One more thing I want to shout out, just to give a little bit, legitimacy to this set, is it is going to be both the Arena Open format this month and the Weekend Qualifier event. So even if you're not planning to do a bunch of drafts, it might be helpful to brush up on the set a little bit. I know there's a lot of people who are going, yeah, I'll probably skip this set, and then realize, oh wait, I'm qualified for the event. I kind of got to do my homework. So just, one more reason to maybe pay a little more attention to this set, even if the initial vibe of Alchemy draft maybe is a little bit off-putting to you. One of the most common questions I've gotten this week after the set review and after streaming this set yesterday is this set just Adventures in the Forgotten Realm 2.0? And, that's especially worrisome if you didn't like Adventures in the Forgotten Realm the first go around. My answer to that question is mostly no. So there are a fifth of the cards in this set reprinted from AFR, and especially one of the most notable examples is the Black-Red Treasure / Steal and Sacrifice deck. A lot of the cards that made that deck tick are still here. There's also a few archetypes like Green-White, Blue-Black, Black-Red, like I mentioned, that have the same archetypes built in, the same gold, signpost, uncommons. But at the same time, I think there's enough going on in the set. New mechanics, a bunch of new cards, the texture of the format just feels quite different to me, that I don't think I would call this AFR 2.0. Now, you're going to get kind of hints of it, right? You're going to get the Black-Red Treasure deck sometimes. You're going to face that Black-Red Treasure deck. You're going to have decks where you're like, that's kind of funny. Half the cards in this deck are the same as they would be in AFR. But I do think there's enough going on, and just by percentages of cards in the set, there's enough new cards that it's going to feel different. So we've got new mechanics like Specialize, like Double Team, which I'm going to get into in a bit. We've also got, like I said, kind of a different texture, kind of a different feel. So AFR was very much defined by the 2-drops, right? If you think back to AFR, it was very much a bunch of really good 2-drops, a bunch of things that made blocking early really difficult. It also kind of had a lack of like sweet and cool things to do. It was kind of just like, okay, well, I'm Black-Red Treasure, or I'm Green-White Life Gain, or maybe I'm Dungeoneering. But there wasn't a ton of, I guess, complexity, or wasn't a ton of things to do past the first week or two of the format. I think a lot of that has changed. So, number one, a lot of the 2-drops have been dialed down. Now, we still have the Hobgoblin Captain. We still have some of the aggressive 2-drops that did run rampant in the previous set. But we've also got a lot more utility 2-drops. We've got some mana ramp 2-drops. The set's also been designed in a way, I think, where one of the main goals is for you to cast your big 6 and 7 drop dragons or your giant monsters. There's a lot of things in the 2-drop slot and the 3-drop slot that help you just set up for the early game, help ramp you, help fix your colors. There's a lot of 5-color fixers. There's a lot of ways to get to 6 and 7 mana. I think a lot of the games are going to play out not as, okay, let me survive the early game and then maybe I'll win with a 7/6 creature. It's going to be like, all right, I'm playing a ramp creature on 2, I'm fixing my mana on 3, and like cast a 6 or 7 drop dragon ahead of curve. They really did put the dragons in Dungeons and Dragons in this set, and I think that's a goal that does shine through. In a lot of my games, it was really feeling like, okay, both players are kind of setting up, and mind you, this is day 1, right? Or day 0 even. This might not be indicative of the entire format, and we'll see after the set does come out. But I had felt like a lot of my games did come down to, a little bit more plotting, a little bit more setting up, a little bit more, okay, the 7 and the 8 drops really did matter. So I do hope that that does carry through in the drafts in the coming days. And not only are there tools to be doing these sweet, rampy, maybe multiple colors things, but there's good payoffs. So I've got 2 payoffs here that I saw were super, super impressive. These are mythics, of course, and these aren't going to come up every draft, but there were good common payoffs as well. So these are 2 cards that I think we even didn't give amazing grades in the set review, or maybe we did, I don't remember, but I think these are better than I might have expected. So Snowborn Simulacra, it's X blue for a mythic. You conjure a duplicate of each of X target non-token permanents into your hand, and then you can spend any amount of mana or any color of mana to cast those spells, and if X is 5 or more, you put one of them onto the battlefield. So what this is you get a lot of mana, maybe you ramp a little bit, and then you copy anything on the battlefield, which you can copy your opponent's stuff, you can copy your stuff, you can even copy lands if you want, and often you want to make this X equals 5 so you can put one of those into play. Really, really good payoff for ramping. Verdant Rejuvenation, this is one I personally played, had a lot of fun with. This is 6 green for a sorcery. You seek X creature, enchantment, or planeswalker cards, where X is the highest mana value among creatures you control, and you put those cards right onto the battlefield. So all Seek is the game looks in your deck for, you know, whatever the thing stated is. So there's creatures, enchantments, planeswalkers in this case. So if I have a 6-drop on the field, and this is what happened to me, I had a 6-drop on the field, and I cast this card, my deck, the game looked through my deck for 6 creatures, which is what I had in my deck. I didn't have enchantments or planeswalkers, and I just went, all right, well, I'm gonna put them on the battlefield. And I got like 25 mana worth of stuff on the battlefield. Very, very easy to win the game from there. And not only was it cool, not only was it fun, but I thought it was actually strategically a good thing to do, like I said, because there is a lot of ramp built into the set. And another thing I want to call out here is sweet build-arounds and even a bunch of 3-color cards that the set has at rare to incentivize you to doing, you know, not just doing things that the archetypes might ask you to do, you know, the 2-color pairs, but maybe go a little bit out there. So we've got 2 here I want to call out. Jan Jansen Chaos Crafter, red, white, black for a 3/3 haste at rare. Tap, sacrifice an artifact creature, you make 2 treasure tokens, or tap, sacrifice a non-artifact, you create 2 1/1 colorless construct artifact tokens. So it's this like nice little tinkering, you know, artificer who you sack your treasures, make 1/1s. The next turn you sack the 1/1s to make more treasures, and you kind of just keep going off. I had this in a black-red deck, splashing in a black-red deck. It was awesome. So it's an easy splash in a black-red deck, but there's also some other stuff in there, like Miram Sentinel Worm, which is a 3 green, blue, red, 6/6 flying ward dragon creature. And it says whenever a non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you make a copy of that dragon. So really incentivizes you to put a lot of dragons in your deck. I think even if there were some of these more expensive cards in AFR that were like, oh, you know, you can ramp into this with treasure, they weren't all that good or all that exciting. And I think these cards are actually good and worth putting in your deck. So all of this is just to say that I think this format is sweet from what I played so far. And I also heard a lot of content creators saying, hey, this was actually really fun. You know, a lot of people were not super optimistic going into the early access event. I know the discourse on Twitter was kind of like, all right, here we go, AFR 2.0. But coming out of it, a lot of it was like, hey, you know, optimistic here, and maybe tentatively, not going to say anything for sure, but I had a lot of fun. And I think that's a good sign. I think if you can come out of somebody playing Magic for 5 hours and go, hey, I had a lot of fun, I want to do that again, that says to me that this set does have legs, and at very least, it won't just feel like Adventures in the Forgotten Realm once again. Okay, so that's my very broad look at the set. Let's dial in a little bit. Let's look at some of the mechanics. So the first mechanic that I want to talk about, just to air out some confusion, maybe explain a little bit better, talk about how it plays, is Specialize. And Specialize is a mechanic that I it's kind of weird. I both want to defend, but also lambast at the same time. So, like, if you haven't seen this mechanic, basically what Specialize is all Specialized cards, they have, it's almost like a 6-sided card. And on the front of the card, they have a Specialized cost. And maybe it's, you know, it's 2 mana, 4 mana, whatever it is. What you do with the card, and all these, the front side of these cards are all monocolored. You pay the Specialized cost, some amount of mana, and then you also discard a card in addition. And the card you discard then affects what the card transforms into. So if you discard a white card or a plains, you're going to get a white gold card. The example I have here is Wilson Bear Comrade, who is a green creature. So you discard a plains or a white card to it and pay the Specialized cost, it turns into a green-white creature. Same goes if you discard a island or a blue card, it'll turn into a blue-green creature. It's even got a mono-green backside. Just, you know, discard a forest or a green card, you can make it a little bit better. Basically, what all these cards are the front side is a fine card. The back side is you can discard a card to make them a little bit bigger, a little bit better, have some cool abilities. So the obvious criticism that I can give these cards, and what a lot of people online have been giving these cards, is it's just a lot of text. It's a lot of text on your cards, and I don't think the payoff is actually really worth it. Like, I think if you just think about all these cards as, you know, fine front side, you can transform them into something else on the back side, like just like transform cards. Like, that's a fine payoff. It's like, okay, cool, I see what's happening there. But I wish it was just like a modal card where you discard a land and you get something, or a spell and you get something. When you have to care about, you know, so many different colors, I think you don't, it's not worth the payoff that you get, right? Now, I will say that while it is very complex, the complexity doesn't actually bear itself out in the games. Like, when you're drafting the card, you just take it and you're like, okay, this is probably a pretty good card. It's a good card in the front. Like, evaluate the card, however good it is on the front side, and then just assume the back side is going to be pretty decent as well. You don't actually have to know all the back sides, right? So the complexity load is a bit reduced in that sense. It's not like you have to memorize all these cards either, right? Because it's digital only. You can just right click, you can see all the versions of the cards. And I'll say that when I was playing with the cards and my opponent was playing with the cards, it was pretty intuitive, right? after I got over the rules bump of, okay, how does this work exactly? It played pretty smoothly, and I actually liked the gameplay of them. Okay, so short opinion piece aside, what do I think about these cards strategically? How do they play? Are they good? I think for the most part, most of these cards, you're going to see them in a pack, and you're going to be like, oh yeah, I just take that card. It's not quite the level of a Saga from Neon Dynasty, where it's just like, oh yeah, just take these, because there are some that, you know, are not as good as others, but I would say all of the rares, they're almost always going to be the pick from the pack. Most of the uncommons too. I'd say maybe about half of the uncommons, so maybe not most, but there's, aside from the blue uncommons, which just to give you a bit of a way to organize them in your mind, which ones are good and not so good. Most of the other ones are just pretty good, I would say. So just take them. You're going to be happy with them. You don't have to worry too much about, like I said, what the backside is. Just think of it as you have a way to upgrade your, mostly like you have a way to upgrade your 2-drop as the game goes on. You do, of course, have to consider that the specialized cost is a cost, right? So some of these cards will give you a card back when you discard a card. You know, part of the cost is discarding a card, and you go, okay, well, how good is the backside of my creature for discarding a card? Some of them have abilities that, like, you know, when this transforms or when it specializes, you draw a card from your opponent's deck or from their graveyard, or you seek a card out from your deck, and it's just like, okay, I get my card back instantly. But some of them you have to question, like, how much do I really want to give up a card? I'd say a lot of them are just going to be, you know, you play them for their fun side, and then once you draw one too many lands, you discard a land, you make it a little bit bigger. So it's almost like a flood insurance card in a way. I think that's the way I want to think about these cards a lot of the time, unless their backsides are some of the rare cards that are just, you know, you want to transform them immediately, you're kind of fine giving up a card's worth of value to do so. Some rules clarifications, because this is not a mechanic that is at all spelled out for the most part. Specialize is a sorcery speed ability. You can't do it as an instant speed. Your opponent also is able to respond to it. It's not like a special action if you've played with Morph, or it's not like werewolves transforming. Your opponent, you pay the specialized cost, your opponent can then in response deal 3 to your creature. Like say it would transform into a 4 toughness creature, they can in response cast a Dragonfire on your 2 toughness creature. Your creature will die. You've paid the mana. You discarded a card. So you do have to worry a little bit about that. Also, one more little rules quirk. If you discard a gold card to one of these specialized cards as the cost, you can choose which color you want it to specialize as, and you can't discard a artifact card to this. Or I think you can, but you'll get nothing out of it. So don't discard an artifact card as part of the cost. It won't transform into anything. All right, the next mechanic is Double Team. You're going to find this on red and white cards. And what Double Team says is, when you attack with this creature, you conjure a copy of that card into your hand, and then both copies lose Double Team, so you can't keep chaining them. Or it'd be a little too good if you could just keep going, okay, attack at a copy, attack at a copy. Can't do that. This is a nice little card advantage mechanic for red and white decks. You're going to only see this on red and white cards, I believe. It's like the red and white marquee mechanic. And I really like how this plays. One thing I can say about Double Team after playing with it is almost all the cards that I saw with Double Team on both my side and the opponent's side of the battlefield were just pretty good. I felt good when I played a Double Team card. I felt, you know, under pressure when my opponent played one. Even there's like a 6-mana 3/4 flyer with Double Team. Even that card was like, yeah, I probably have to kill that thing or else they're just gonna get another one. The cheaper the Double Team card is, the better, I think, because the first time you attack with your Double Team card, you do want your original copy to be able to survive. The more expensive ones, if they don't have evasion or anything, you do have to force in some other way because boards are going to be a little bit more clogged up. But yeah, I think it's pretty safe just to say if it has Double Team on it, it's probably a pretty good card. When you're playing with Double Team cards, removal is really nice to have in your deck, because the hoop you have to jump through with a Double Team card, like I mentioned, is to be able to get in a clean attack with it, or else you're not really getting any value. Now, you could set up a situation where you have a wide board and you don't care if your first Double Team card gets eaten because, you know, you're dealing a bunch of damage. That's going to happen sometimes too. But, you know, of course, in the early game, you want to make sure your 2/1 Double Team card does get in. So any cheap removal is good. Even combat tricks are okay. So kind of just plays in red-white space pretty cleanly. Not too much to say about these cards, just well, other than I like this mechanic. It plays well and gives a little bit of card advantage to red and white, which is nice. All right, the next mechanic here is kind of a minor one. It doesn't show up on too many cards, but it is new, and it's boons. So boons are sort of mini emblems, mini modifiers that go away after one use. So the example here I have is Arcane Archery. It's a combat trick. 2 and a green instant. Target creature gets +3/+3, trample, and gains reach. And then you get a boon with, when you cast your next creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter, reach counter, and trample counter on it. So basically just buffs your next creature. Not too much to say here about, strategically how to play these cards. You kind of, the way it plays out is you kind of just play your card and it's like, okay, well, my next thing gets a bonus. The one thing I will say is, you kind of have to, or you kind of want to plan out, well, what's the next creature I'm going to play? You want to make sure that you're getting the best out of your boon. So, for example, if you've got a really large creature, you don't want to give the trample boon to it. Or if you've got a boon that only buffs power, well, maybe you want to give that to a lifelinker or a flyer or something with a keyword ability, right? So, yeah, it plays pretty cleanly. It's pretty intuitive. Definitely not as confusing as Double Team or Specialized. Not too much to say about it, and yeah, we'll move on. All right, next up, I want to talk about removal. And one of the big questions I'm always asking myself going into a new set or in the first few days of a new set is how important is it to have removal spells in my deck? Because there's some formats where, yeah, I really care if I have to answer a bunch of bombs. And there's some formats where it's like, well, you know, the common creatures are pretty good. I don't really want to prioritize removal spells over the good common creatures. Like, you know, Midnight Hunt is a good example of this where, you know, removal spells just weren't that important because there's so many value creatures running around. And then the inverse of this, of course, is Crimson Vow, where you've got a bunch of bombs that you needed removal spells in your deck for, because if you didn't get those things off the battlefield, you were just going to die, and the commons couldn't really compete or couldn't really fight on the same axis. So you did need to have 4, 5, 6 removal spells in your deck. I think this is a set where you're going to want to prioritize the good removal spells and maybe the kind of medium removal spells too, because I think this is a set that is a little bit more like Crimson Vow-ish, a little bit less like Midnight Hunty. And the reason I say that is, one, there's a lot of really big creatures that are difficult to interact with in combat that I think you're going to see fairly often. Again, going back to, there's a lot of ramp in the format. A lot of the decks revolve around resolving big things. So you have stuff like Dread Lindworm, which is a common. It's a 7 mana common that's a 7/6 that can't be blocked by creatures power 3 or less, which means if you don't have a 4 power creature, it's an unblockable 7/6, and that thing's going to come down on turn 5, on turn 6 sometimes. Stuff like Sword Coast Serpent. This is a 7 mana 5 blue 6/6. As long as you've cast a non-creature, can't be blocked. Again, kind of a thing that you might think, okay, well, it's a really expensive thing at that point of the game. You know, maybe I've already killed my opponent, or maybe I'm going to be able to block these big things. These are the kind of two big evasive things that I think you're going to see with regularity on the battlefield a little bit earlier than you might expect. And also, the natural foil to expensive cards that are kind of difficult to deal with is aggression, right? You know, naturally, if you can run over your opponent before they cast these big things, or, you know, they cast the big thing, you attack for lethal the next turn, it doesn't matter that much. But I don't think we're at such a level of aggression that these cards aren't going to matter. I think these cards are going to come down, in some cases, stabilize you, and then, you know, you're not going to consistently enough be able to go 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop attack you where these cards aren't going to matter. I do think that these cards are going to be the cards that quote-unquote matter in a lot of games. Secondly, we've got specialized cards. And one, a lot of these specialized cards, when they specialize, especially the rares, are pretty nasty, and you do want to be able to deal with them. But two, if you have a decent amount of removal in your deck, you can really punish those specialized cards like I was talking about, especially the ones that don't give the person who specializes their card back in some way or another. You're able to go, okay, well, you know, they specialize, and you go, okay, well, I untap and kill it. They're kind of down on that exchange. So the combination of a lot of games come down to haymakers. A lot of games are going to revolve around a specialized card. There's not quite enough aggression to consistently punish these kind of starts. I think all of that comes down to, yeah, I probably want to prioritize removal a little bit higher than I might have in some sets in the past few years. And what removal do we have at our disposal? So the two best ones, I think, are ports over from AFR. We've got Grim Bounty, 2 black for sorcery, destroy target creature or planeswalker. You make a treasure token. And a Dragon's Fire, 1 in a red instant, deals 3 to something, and you can reveal a dragon from your hand or look at a dragon on your side of the battlefield, and instead of dealing 3, it deals damage equal to that dragon's power, which is notable because this deck, or this format, has a lot of dragons at common and uncommon, much more so than in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, where, you know, it's kind of flavor texty, that dragon line of text. Not here. A lot of times, Dragonfire is going to deal 4 damage, 5 damage. I just talked about 2 big dragons that you're going to see that will help you deal, 7 damage in the case of that big green Lindworm. So, Dragon's Fire even a little bit better, I think, than it was in Forgotten Realms. Some newcomers to the fold. We've got Band Together in green, 2 and a green for an instant. Up to 2 target creatures you control deal damage equal to their power to another target creature. Really nice bite spell. This is a little bit, a step ahead of some of the bite spells we've seen in some sets. This can't really get blown out as easily as some of these bite or fight spells. The concern is always like, okay, I cast my bite spell, and they just go, okay, I remove it in response. Band Together, looking at 2 creatures, means that it's a lot less likely that their creature isn't going to die at the end of the exchange, even if they do have a removal spell up or a combat trick or something like that. And then we have Undersimplify, which is a counter spell. It's 1 in a blue instant, choose target spell, If it's a creature spell, it perpetually gets -2, -0, counter target spell, and if its controller pays 2. So not quite a removal spell, but if the things you're worried about are the big haymakers like I was talking about, this does do a good job of countering big things. And, it trades for a 2-drop on turn 2, trades for their 3, often, usually, trades for most stuff in the mid game. And even if it doesn't, even if they do have the mana to pay, sometimes you just go, okay, well, I'll cast this anyways. You pay 2 mana, and I make your creature a little smaller. A little bit of a buyout clause there. So I do think this is one of Blue's better tools in the format, and it's going to be a card I do take pretty highly. And then White's got, a smattering of removal. Minimus Containment is back from AFR. You Hear Something I'll Watch is back. And we also have Patriarch's Humiliation, which is the newcomer, and I think is probably the best of the bunch here. So single white mana instant. Target creature perpetually loses all abilities, then Patriarch's Humiliation deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control to it. So you have 5 creatures, 1 mana instant, deal 5 damage. Not always going to be 5, of course, but in the early game, it's going to be, 2, 3. It's going to scale as the game goes on, as long as you can keep a board. So I think this probably edges out those other 2 white removal spells for me. And yeah, I was impressed with this card, both for me casting it and on my opponent's side of the battlefield. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into some archetypes. And I'll say before we jump into these, I think the archetypes are not quite as interwoven into the fabric of the format as you might have seen in some other formats. Again, this format was not built from the ground up, so I don't think there's going to be like a super synergistic ninja deck or all enchantment deck. Not that there's ninjas in this set, but just to give examples from some recent sets, they're slightly more like light themes. And I think there's going to be some decks that can really lean heavily into these themes. But a lot of the times these are kind of just a flavor of your deck, less so the core or the crux of what's going on. So the first archetype here is blue, white, blink, and flicker. The signpost in common here, OG, the Exquisite Blade, 2 blue, white for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life and you scry 2. And whenever you cast your second spell each turn, exile up to 1 target creature you control and then return it to the battlefield. So nice little engine in itself. It's a good thing. Good ETB on itself. Good thing to blink if you have nothing else. And, of course, can reset your Priest of Ancient Lore, for example. Just, 2 and a white, 2/1. When ATBs, you gain a life and you draw a card. The downgraded Inspiring Overseer. Aside from OG, there's a few other things that blink at common. There's Blur, which is 2 and a blue for an instant. You flicker something you control and you draw a card. There's also a common 4 mana 3/3 that flicker something when it comes in. So there's some stuff built in there. Like I said, I think this is going to be mostly a light theme. Unless you do have OG, like multiple copies of OG, you can really, really go deep. Because I think those 2 commons I just mentioned are kind of fillery commons, to be honest. The best card for this deck, of course, is Priest of Ancient Lore. If you can keep blinking that, you're just off to the races. Another note with OG is, since the trigger condition is whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you exile up to 1 target creature, you really want to include some more cheap cards in your deck if you can. Some 1-drops, some 2-drops. You want to be able to double spell. If your deck is all 3 and 4 drops, it's going to be pretty difficult to trigger that. So I've been, moderately impressed with this. And yeah, I think if you've got a bunch of Priests of Ancient Lores and you see an OG, yeah, this is definitely a good deck to move into. All right, next up here, we've got 3 archetypes at once that we're covering. Very efficient here. We've got Teamer Dragons, or red, blue, green dragons. Each of these decks are, somewhat distinct. There's a red, blue, red, green, and blue, red version. They all care about dragons in some regard. They all have a slightly different bent to them, so let's go through them. The blue-green one is kind of a rampy defensive deck, as blue-green often is. It's got Corlessa, Scale Singer, at the helm here. It's a 1/4 for 2 mana. You may look at the top card of your library. You can cast a dragon spell from the top of it. Thrakus the Butcher is the red-green uncommon here. 2 red-green for a 3/4 trample. Whenever it attacks, you double the power of each dragon you control. Then we've got Lozan, Dragon's Legacy, 3 blue-red for a 4/2 flyer. Whenever you cast an adventure or a dragon spell, Lozan deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target that isn't a commander. I know I noted that there wasn't any weird multiplayer stuff in the set, but they kept the wording like this. Really just means to any target. So for our purposes, don't worry about the commander text. But I have faced all of these cards, and I was really only impressed with Corlessa, to be honest, as a good cheap blocker. Draws you some dragons in the mid game. Again, there's a lot of common and uncommon dragons in this set. We've got some nice role players like cheap mana accelerants, which are dragons. There's a 2-drop mana accelerant that is a dragon and pays you off for casting dragons. It's a 2 mana 0/2 that taps for a green, and you gain 2 life whenever you cast a dragon spell. And then there's some really expensive common creatures you can ramp into that I mentioned. There's some things just filling out the file, like, a 3 mana 2/1 flyer that's a dragon. So you're not going to be short on actually triggering these cards. Are they good to trigger. I mean, Thrakus and Lozan. Lozan's the most aspirational for sure. You look at it and you're like, oh, I could deal a bunch of damage, but you know what happens all the time is like you cast your 5-mana 4/2 flyer and you have to like block with it because your opponent's pressuring you, or they just kill it because it's very fragile. If you don't tap with it and you've got a dragon or adventure, yeah, it's really cool. But I so far have not been super impressed with either this card or the deck, because I think blue-red mechanically doesn't have a lot of overlap. Green-red, I was a little bit more impressed with. Just, you know, green-red beatdown deck kind of makes some sense. Like I said, Corlessa, the blue-green one, makes the most sense to me. Just defensive, ramping, cast your big things. This plays into that plan perfectly. And I do think, you know, with so much good fixing in this set, and there's a lot of really good fixing, it's definitely possible to have a 3-color dragon deck. Maybe you're not full 3 colors, but you're blue-green with a red splash. You're splashing a dragon fire. Maybe you're splashing that 6-mana rare dragon I was talking about, Mirum Sentinel Worm, the 6-mana 3-color 6/6 flyer that copies your dragons. That's a really, really good reason to splash a 3rd color. Maybe you pick up, you know, all three of the dragon uncommons, and you're like, okay, well, this can, you know, I can put these together and have a really heavy synergy dragon deck. But I'm not sure. I haven't been super impressed with what I've seen so far on the opposite side of the battlefield. Like, I haven't drafted this myself. I found it was a little bit too, you know, maybe a little bit too mid-rangey, a little bit too, you know, people weren't going so over the top, but small sample size. I don't want to write this off right away, but I guess mostly what I'm trying to put forth here is I would not necessarily go into this deck full on dragons for the green-red and the blue-red dragons. I do like Corlessa a little bit more, and of course, the 3-color dragon is a really good reason to go into it. All right, next up, we've got red-white double team, and this is a pretty straightforward deck. You know, it's like I was saying, all the double team cards are pretty good. You can't really go wrong, I don't think, just putting the double team cards in your deck. The gold uncommon here, Liara of the Flaming Fist, red-white 2/2. It says, at the beginning of each combat, each creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, if it has the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard. So, of course, that is calling out to double team, because if you double team, you'll have creatures of the same name. But also, it just applies to additional copies of cards you've drafted. If you have 3 or 4 copies of a card, or 2 or 3 copies of a card in your deck, you'll get bonuses when they're both in the battlefield. It also, interestingly enough, applies to tokens. So if you've got tokens, they'll get a buff. If you've got 2 soldier tokens, they call out to each other. Liara's also got this powerful secondary ability here. It's 1 red-white. It says, another target non-token creature you control gains first strike and double team until end of turn. Activate this only as a sorcery and only once. So it's a one-time shot, can't activate it twice. But getting a copy of, maybe a giant dragon if you're being super aspirational, or just whatever your best creature is really powerful. So not too much to say about this archetype other than I was impressed by it. I got beaten by it quite a few times. I played it myself. I thought it was great. But yeah, just your typical red-white aggro deck with this double team mechanic, which again, I have found pretty good. All right, moving on to green-white life gain. This is almost a direct port over from Adventures of the Forgotten Realm. We've got Trelastera, Moondancer, green-white, 2/2. Whenever you gain life, you put a counter on Trelastera, Moondancer, you scry one. Most of the life gain payoffs and life gain enablers, like Prosperous Innkeeper, are still here. I will note that Cleric class, which was one of the best payoffs, is not in this set. So it did get a little bit of a debuff, I would say, compared to where it was in AFR. I'll also note that while Trelastera definitely looks like an aggressive card, kind of gets bigger, it's a 2-drop that wants you to beat down, I found that it was best to build these decks a little bit bigger, and maybe the set context has changed. I haven't played with this deck just yet, but I would imagine with all the good green ramp and good green top end in this set, I think that you generally want to build this a little bit slower. I saw the mistake of people drafting this too aggressively, a bunch of combat tricks and really trying to optimize on their unicorns and their Trelasteras. But I just found that casting a bunch of big, beefy green creatures, especially the quality ones in this set, like Owlbear, Herdgorger, that Lindworm I was talking about, was a bit more successful. And it kind of makes sense, too. If you're gaining a bunch of life, you want the game to go longer rather than shorter. So, just some small thoughts on life gain there. All right, next up we've got Black-White Sacrifice / Blink. And the name of the game here is Permanents Leaving Your Battlefield. And of course, Sacrifice counts for that. Combat counts for that. Killing your opponent's killing one of your creatures, you blinking one of your creatures. This is a pretty light theme. There's not a lot of cards that call this out. But the gold signpost in common is a banger. I had a really, really good time with this card. I think it's really powerful. So, Minthara of the Absolute, 2 black-white for a 2/4. And There's a lot of words in this card that are a little bit confusing, but stick with me, I'll explain it after. It says starting intensity 0. Creatures you control get +X+O, where X is Minthara of the Absolute's intensity. And then whenever a permanent leaves the battlefield, the starting intensity, or the intensity of Minthara, gets upped by 1. This triggers only once per turn. So basically, whenever a permanent leaves your battlefield, once per turn, your creatures will get a boost +1 attack. And then if it happens next turn, +2 attack, so on and so on. So as things leave the battlefield, the rest of your things get bigger. And, then you can, obviously you can play stuff in your hand. Those things will come in as bigger if she's still in the battlefield. And this triggers once every turn. So you can do it on your opponent's turn as well. Yeah, really, really impressed with this card. It reads pretty, okay. Not like fantastically, I think. But I think it plays a lot better than it reads even. So what happens is you sacrifice a treasure. Your team get boost. And it's like, okay, cool. Combat happens on your opponent's turn. Your team gets boost. Your turn happens. You blink something. All of a sudden, your 1-power creatures become threats. All of your things become threats, and it's very easy to just steal a win from almost nowhere, right? So, this is another one, I wouldn't lean too heavily into the theme, but this card itself does really reward you. And you don't have to work so hard for this card, honestly. Like, all of the cards in your deck are probably... It's not that hard to get things into the graveyard when you're playing Magic. And if you have treasures, that's obviously good too. If you have blink synergies, that works nicely too. This card kind of just does its thing on its own, and it's just a good card. But, worth noting, there are a few other cards that call out to this theme. Much lesser payoffs, I will say, to Minthara. And I liked my black-white deck yesterday. I had a pretty good black-white deck. I had 2 copies of Minthara. And yeah, this is a card I would be happy to take early. Next up, we've got green-black Graveyard, the golden common Kaga Shadow Archdruid, 2 black, green for a 1/4. When it attacks, it gains Death Touch and you mill 2 cards, and then you can cast one of those cards out of your graveyard that turn. So black-green's got this kind of graveyard theme, and it's pretty... Not to say it's not there, but most times when we see black-green graveyard, it's kind of like incidental. I think that's kind of what's happening here. The black cards in the set are really good. The green cards in the set are really good. I don't think you have to have too much synergy going on here. There's a few payoffs at common and uncommon that are, reasonable. I wouldn't lean too hard into this synergy, though. I think you just put good green and black cards in your deck, you'll have a pretty good time. Similarly here, we have black-blue, and black-blue is nominally combat triggers matter. So this is another archetype that was ported over from Adventures of the Forgotten Realms. It wasn't very good back then. I don't think it got any help now. The gold uncommon Cridle of Baldur's Gate, 2-mana 1/3. When it deals damage to a player, that player loses a life, mills a card, you gain a life and scry one. And then whenever you attack, you can pay 2 to make something unblockable. Like, this card itself is good, but what this deck is asking you to do is just not. It's asking you to get through these creatures with combat triggers. So something like Soul Knife Spy, 3-mana 3/2. When it deals damage, you draw a card. Not the worst card in the world, but not a great card. And what often happens is you spend mana to get something in. Maybe you equip it with a Thieves tool to make it unblockable, and they just go, all right, like, cheap interaction spell, I've wasted your entire turn. And the upside of when it actually happens when you do connect is like, all right, I've drawn a card. That's the best payoff in the set, I believe. It's just something that draws a card. So I wouldn't lean too heavily into this theme. Again, just like black-green, just draft good blue and black cards. Now, I will note, there are some pretty good blue-black rares. Tasha, Unholy Archmage, and John Arenicus the Exile. 2 really, really good rares. Not going to read them all out because a lot of wordy stuff. Just know that they're very good cards. You can draft blue-black. Just don't put too much stock into this theme, I would say. And then, I've saved the best, the worst for last, Black-Red Treasure. I feel like I don't have to talk too much about this, but I will, for posterity's sake and for people that maybe hadn't drafted AFR, Black-Red just has a lot of really good cards. The treasure theme, anything that makes treasure is pretty darn good. This deck did a lot of really good things. Its cards were just good on rate. Everything that said treasure was just a good card. It also was able to splash pretty easily, which maybe is even a bigger boon in this set with some really good top-end cards. It could cast expensive cards easily. And of course, it had the Steel and Sack package. Price of Loyalty is not in this set, but Incessant Provocation, which is a 4-mana active treason effect. It says, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains haste, and then perpetually gains this creature attacks each combat available. So basically, if you want to cast this early in the game, you can take your opponent's creature out of the blocking equation for the rest of the game because they have to attack each turn. But often, when you cast this card, you're not giving it back to them, right? You're casting a Deadly Dispute to sacrifice your creature, or you're sacking it to your Sepulchre Ghoul or whatever it is. And it's just a nice little package that, last time around, if you didn't play, the Act of Treason, whatever, the Incessant Provocation's predecessor, was the top common in the set. That's how good the synergies were, because there's so many sacrifice outlets, and a lot of these sacrifice outlets have been ported over. They remain in this set. So is this going to be the best deck? I want to say no, but I do think from playing it a bunch yesterday, I think it's still really, really good. Time's going to tell, right? We're going to see once it pans out, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is still the best deck in the format. So that is a bit of a blemish on a format that I do have a lot of nice things to say. So I will be fully transparent about that. I do worry a little bit that this will be remain the dominant deck as the format goes on. All right, moving on to some top commons. The way I like to do my top commons here on these set overview shows is not top 3 or anything like that. I kind of point out what I think are going to be the best commons, not necessarily in a top order. I'll note when I say, this common is much better than the rest of the white commons, for example, but a lot of them are kind of just being thrown in there in the conversation, things that I could see being some of the better commons, and commons I wouldn't mind taking early in the draft. So let's start with white. I do think that the clear runaway best common is Priest of Ancient Lore. The 3 mana 2/1, when it ETBs, you draw a card, you gain a life. Yes, this is not as good as Inspiring Overseer, but there's a lot of room between bad and Inspiring Overseer. This is still going to be very good. It was really good last time around. Plays so well with all the themes in white. Blinking, sacrificing, you name it. It's just a phenomenal card. Soldier of the Watch, which is a 2 mana 2/1 double team. Steadfast Paladin, 2 mana 2/2 lifelink. Flaming Fist Dustguard, 2 mana 3/1 that gives you a boon where the next creature you cast gets perpetually +1. So kind of nice little trifecta of 2 drops here. Not sure which one is going to be the best. Steadfast Paladin, just the classic 2 mana 2/2 lifelink. That slot's always pretty good in most sets, so I would maybe put my money on that, but I do have my eye out for Soldiers of the Watch, the 2 mana 2/1 double strike. I think that card could be pretty good as well. Then I've got a few other white commons I want to shout out that might be in the mix somewhere. Blessed Hippogriff is a 3 white 2/3 flyer, and it's got an adventure as well. The flyer side is an instant that says single white mana, target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, and then the creature side of it is a 2/3 flyer that when it attacks, something else you control gets flying. So just a nice little creature. Patriarch's Humiliation, the removal spell I mentioned earlier, single white mana, instant. It deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control the target creature. Like I said, I think this is probably the front runner for the best white common. We're gonna see. It might be one of the other 2 white removal spells I mentioned, but I do have my eye on this one, and it was pretty good when I played it. All right, moving on to blue, and man, blue gave me some trouble. One of the things that I didn't mention so far that I think is gonna really color this set is that blue's commons kinda aren't so good. I had to struggle to come up with a top common list here. I think that blue wasn't very good last time, and in fact, it was the worst color by a lot. And it didn't get a lot of help. A lot of the cards are just returning from AFR. And the ones that are new, I mean, some of them are okay. And I've got some of them here. But some of them, they're not, they're not blowing me out of the water by any means. The best common, I think, is Undersimplify. That 2 mana counter spell that counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. With the, if it's a creature, that thing gets -2 perpetually. We also got Young Blue Dragon as a card that I think is okay. 5 mana 3/3 flyer. It's got an adventure side of 1 blue sorcery, scry 1, then draw a card. So both of these fine cards, but again, none of them are, they don't blow my socks off by any means. And then I got a smattering of other blue creatures I like a decent amount. Air Cult Elemental, 6 mana 2/5 flyer, then when it comes in it bounces something. Rhyme Shield Frost Giant, 5 mana 4/5 with Ward 3. 2 new cards here that I think could be pretty good. Hypnotic Pattern, single blue mana for an instant. Target creature perpetually gets -2, and target creature gets -2 until end of turn. So you can kind of have some combat blowouts, but also it's sort of like a 2 mana, make your 2-drop not have any power. 1 mana, make your 2-drop not have any power. Kind of a nice card. And then Lizard Folk Librarian, 4 mana, 3 blue for a 2/4 double team. When it attacks, when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. So yeah, just like a fine card. Again, really scraping the bottom of the barrel here for blue. I think blue's got a few decent rares that would pull me in to the to drafting blue, and it's got 1 or 2 really good uncommons, but I do think blue is probably going to be the worst color this time around, unfortunately, which, can't, maybe we can hope for some alchemy rebalances as the set goes on. Maybe they're going to do that for limited purposes. I'm not sure yet, but yeah, pour one out for blue once again. Black, on the other hand, I think is just busted. I think it's got so many good cards, and I've got 2 slides worth of cards here. So Grim Bounty, the black removal spell. Sepulchre Ghoul, the 2 mana 2/2, and it's a 2/2 in this set. It's an Alchemy Rebalance 2/2. 2 mana 2/2. This used to be a 2/1. Sacrifice another creature. Sepulchre Ghoul gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Activate this only once per turn. Making this a 2/2 and not a 2/1 is a pretty big difference. It just means it's going to be able to survive so many more combats than the 2-1 version would. So it's going to be really difficult to block in the early turns. Just threat of activation means it's going to be a 2-2 unblockable a lot of the time. Speaking of 2-2 unblockable a lot of the time, we've got Guild Swarm Prowler, another newcomer. 1 and a black for a 2-1 death touch. When it dies, if it wasn't blocking, you draw a card. So if you sacrifice it, you draw a card. If you attack with it, they block, you draw a card. And of course, they're going to lose their creature too. So really difficult to block. Just a nice little creature. Vampire Spawn, shout out to Spawn. This was a great card last time around. It's good this time too. Shambling Gas, Deadly Dispute. We've also got a few newcomers here. Sewer Plague, which is another removal spell. Hook Horror, which is a 5-mana 3/3 that you can, when it dies, it comes back 1 power and toughness, smaller each time until it dies. Then we've got Unsummon Dead. We've also got Summon Undead, which is a 5-mana sorcery. You can mill 3 cards and you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Not every set where the reanimation spell is a common, number 1, but not every set the reanimation spell is good. And I think that in this set with a lot of really big creatures and ways to get those big creatures in the graveyard with Specialized, you can discard them as a cost. I think this card is going to be a little bit better than normally we see reanimation spells being. So yeah, Black's just a laundry list of really, really good cards. I think it's clearly the best color. I would be very shocked if it wasn't. So yeah, again, kind of little bit of color imbalance, maybe weighing my optimism down just slightly here with blue being not so good and black being really good, but we'll see how it pans out. Moving on to red. Clearly, I think the best card is Dragon's Fire, the 2-mana deal 3. Incessant Provocation, of course, gotta shout that out, as I think is going to be very good still with all the sack outlets still remaining in black. And then I've got a few creatures here. All of the double team cards I think are good. Giant Fire Beetles, Ganassi Rabble Rouser, Warriors of Tiamat. Just, again, all of the commons with double team are pretty good. Then Hobgoblin Captain, 3-mana 3/1 when it attacks. If you've got 6 power or greater of creatures worth attacking, it gets first strike. Just a decent aggressive card. So red's got some, I would say, really good 2 top-end cards here with Dragon's Fire and Provocation. And its creature's just fine, right? I think it's kind of the middle-of-the-road color where it's got some good stuff. The double team stuff is good. But past that, I think not, some of the cards are not so good. They're like bad combat tricks and stuff like that. But overall, looks pretty good. And then green. I like green quite a bit this time around. Green's got a really nice mana ramp creature here. So Underseller Myconid, 2 and a green for a 1/2. When it enters the battlefield or dies, you make a 1/1 Saproling token and you can tap it to add a mana of any color. Just super, super solid. Just super good rate for a 3-mana mana creature. And of course, I was mentioning all these good expensive cards in the set. Really nice to be able to have a quality ramp creature on turn 3, right? It's not like you're tapping out 3 mana, ramping, not affecting the board. You're stabilizing with that 1/1. And if this thing ever has to jump, you get another chump blocker. Owlbear, boosted by a good 3-mana ramp spell. We've got this returning from AFR, 5-mana, 3 GG for a 4/4 trample. When ETBs, draw a card. Very simple card, but very good. Hill Giant Herd Gorger is here again. 6-mana, 7/6. When it ETBs, you gain 3. Kind of just a stand-in for a good big green thing that stabilizes you. Again, good with all the ramp. And Band Together, the green removal spell. And to close this out here, I'm going to mention 2 colorless cards that are worth noting. Pilgrim's Eye and Prophetic Prism. Pilgrim's Eye is a 3-mana, 1/1 artifact creature with flying. When it ETBs, you can search your library for a basic land. Prophetic Prism is a 2-mana artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and it has the ability to tap, pay 1, add a mana of any color. So basically, it filters your mana at the cost of, not a card, right? You're getting your card back. And also, it's good for sacrificing to your things that care about sacrificing artifacts, which there's a few in there. Pilgrim's Eye plays that same role. Pilgrim's Eye is also good in the Blink deck, right? Anytime you're sacrificing anything. These cards are just quality cards, and they enable synergies. I think these are cards that are probably going to be a little bit overlooked, to be honest, by people that haven't played with them. But these are some of the better commons in the set. And that's it. Gonna end it there. Thank you so much for listening or watching. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to comment, like, and subscribe, all that stuff. And if you're listening, check out the YouTube with all the visuals if you want some visual aid for following along with this. We'll see you next time on the next episode of Limited Level Ups. Next week, we're going to be covering, the state of the format address, where I talk about the set after playing for a while. All right. See you, everybody.